there's this moment when you graduate, where everyone's just happy, people are taking pictures, teachers are smiling, your parents are proud, and you're standing there thinking, wait, is that it? Because the weird thing is, you spend years working towards this moment. Yeah, coming up with an introduction for my first video in this format turned out to be surprisingly difficult. Hopefully I'll get better at this over time. I guess I'll tell you what graduating from high school in Germany is actually like. You see, I originally wanted the title of this video to be Why I Hated Graduating in Germany. And honestly, that's because before the final celebrations even began, I had already spent a lot of time reflecting on my overall school experience. Looking back now, I'd say my feelings are a lot more complicated than that. In the end, it was a very mixed experience, I guess. But before I explain why, I should probably give you a bit of context on how the German education system works, because it's quite different from what many people are used to. You see, I grew up in East Germany, in the state of Brandenburg, and the school system here is fairly structured from the early age. You start with primary school, which lasts until the 6th grade here. That's already unusual because in most other German states, primary school ends after the 4th grade. After that, students are divided into different types of secondary schools, largely based on their academic performance and recommendations from their teachers. While parents usually have some influence over the decision, your grades also play a significant role in determining which path you end up taking. The three traditional school types are Hauptschule, Realschule, and Gymnasium. Hauptschule is the most vocationally oriented path and usually prepares students for apprenticeships and skilled trades, stuff like that. Realschule is considered to be the most middle option. It offers a broader academic education while still leading many students into vocational training. Then there's Gymnasium, which is the most academic route. Its primary purpose is to prepare students for university. I attended a Gymnasium, which meant that I was working towards earning the Abitur. The Abitur is essentially Germany's university entrance qualification. I guess you can think of it as a German equivalent of a high school diploma, but with a much stronger academic focus. It's the certificate that allows you to apply to almost any university in Germany. Everything eventually leads to those final years of school. In Brandenburg, the last 2 years of Gymnasium, 11th and 12th grade, are called the Qualifikationsphase or qualification phase. Now, this is where things suddenly become a lot more serious. Unlike the earlier grades, almost every grade received now counts towards your final Abitur result. Instead of simply passing from one year to the next, you're effectively collecting points over the course of 2 years. And those points, together with your final written and oral exams, determine your final Abitur grade. In other words, nearly every test, presentation, and assignment during those 2 years contributes to a number that will eventually appear on your diploma. So, by the time you reach graduation, you've spent years, and especially those final 2, working towards one single moment. Fast forward to April 2026. Spring break was over, and suddenly we had our final week of school. Now, Germany has a tradition during that last week before the Abitur exams. The graduating class dresses up according to a different theme every day. We call it Mottowoche, or Motto Week. It's not mandatory, but almost everyone joins in. On Monday, we were supposed to be overdressed, as if we were going to a casino. On the other hand, on Tuesday, we were told to dress up like our favorite childhood hero. Wednesday was group costumes, and Thursday was simply the first letter of your name. In comparison to the other days, Friday was a little different. That was the day we received our final grades from the 4th and last semester and found out whether we had actually been granted permission to take the Abitur exams. In German, that's called the Abiturzulassung, which basically means you've officially met all the requirements to take your final exams. On the other hand, Monday through to Wednesday were still technically normal school days. We still had lessons and teachers could still give us grades if they wanted to. Realistically speaking, though, I don't think anyone cared. What's more, if you had classes that weren't even relevant to your Abitur exams, some teachers would even let you skip them entirely. Unfortunately, or not unfortunately for me, I can't decide. Every single class I still had was relevant for my exams. Now, I've never really understood why we celebrate before the exams instead of after them. Just think about it. On Friday, there's still a chance that you don't even receive permission to take the Abitur. If that happens, you don't graduate. Instead, you repeat the year and go back to grade 11 for a while. And even if you do get permission, there's still the possibility of failing the Abitur itself a few weeks later. Frankly, imagine spending an entire week celebrating graduation only to find out afterward that you actually did not graduate. Would it make much more sense to celebrate once everything was actually over? With that out of the way, those theme days weren't the only thing happening. Every year, the graduating class also organizes a whole range of activities in the schoolyard. Just to give a few examples, bobby car races, football matches against teachers, obstacle courses, games, and, as you expected, an unbelievable amount of shouting. Nobody was audible the entire time. Then Tuesday came, the traditional prank day. By the time students arrived that morning, the school looked completely different. As far as I remember, the entire schoolyard was covered in tape. Entrances were blocked, empty beer bottles were scattered around as decorations in every possible way into the building had been barricaded. You could also see tons of useless papers on the ground, test papers ranging from grade 1 up until grade 12. Oh, and I forgot about glitter, confetti, and lipstick. The graduating class stood at every entrance, making sure that practically nobody made it inside without getting their face covered in glitter, lipstick, or both. Well, unless you decide to climb over the fences, then technically trespass. Yes, I actually saw people do that. But even then, the graduating class showed absolutely no mercy. Some of them even stopped classrooms while lessons were still going on, even though that wasn't technically allowed. Pure chaos, I guess. So, what did I do during that week, honestly? Not much, actually. I didn't even dress up for any of the themed days. Why? Well, firstly, I don't come from a wealthy family, and honestly, I just couldn't justify spending a bunch of money on 4 different costumes that I wear exactly once and then never touch again. I'd rather spend that money on something I'll actually use. Besides, I don't think anyone would have cared what costume I showed up in, and I was right. You see, I wasn't always more of an outsider, not in the sense that I was bullied or actively excluded. Nothing like that. It's more that people simply didn't pay much attention to me. I wasn't one of those popular kids. Actually, to this day, I still don't know what you have to do to qualify as a popular kid, or the very definition of a popular kid. Well, I don't even think I ever want to be. Actually, I prefer working in the background. I prefer being left alone. I prefer not being forced into things. Peer pressure. I prefer working on my own. I hope, and also side fact, I hope you know what stylistic device I just utilized. On Thursday, every graduating class in my city met up after school, got on their bicycles, and we all hiked together to the local beach. I joined them, not because I was particularly excited about the party itself, but because I generally love riding my bicycle. I don't get many opportunities to do it, so I wasn't going to miss this one. Seeing hundreds of graduating students riding through town in ridiculous costumes was actually a pretty surreal sight. I'll admit it. Once we reached the beach, people started drinking, smoking, partying, exactly what you probably expect. Meanwhile, I stayed there for about 3 minutes before quietly leaving. I've never been into drinking, smoking, or drugs, and standing around watching everyone else do it just wasn't my idea of a good time. Ironically, the friends I actually wanted to spend time with didn't even go there by bike. They did not bring their bicycles to school. Understandable, some of them live really far away. So, Yeah. And by the time they finally arrived, I was already home. Or halfway? I will never know, for sure. At that point, I had honestly grown tired of the whole final week. More than anything else, I just wanted to be over so the Abitur exams could finally commence. Friday marked the end of regular school life. No more lessons, no more homework, no more sitting through lectures. From that point on, schooling exists whenever you had an exam. From that day onward, teachers were no longer allowed to discuss anything related to their subjects with us. I mean, you could still have a casual conversation with them, talk about the weather, ask how they're doing, but nothing that was related to their field of occupation, their classes. Why? The idea was to guarantee equal opportunities for everyone. Now let's talk a bit about the exams themselves. In Germany, it's final years of graduation. You choose subjects in which you'll take your Abitur exams. My two advanced courses, or Leistungskurse as we call them in German, were computer science and English. Those automatically became two of my written exams. Then I had to choose a third written exam for a non-advanced subject. History. Why history? I'd rather not explain. Let's just say that the German school system has a remarkable talent for forcing you into decisions you'd never make voluntarily. Explain why would require an entire video of its own, and I have absolutely no intention of putting either of us through that today. And lastly, I also needed one oral Abitur exam. I chose math. Yes, you can actually take an oral mathematics exam in Germany. Don't ask me why. Well, in general, yeah, school was over and you simply stayed at home and studied on your own or with friends if that's your thing. The only reason to return to school was to sit the exams themselves. Then June 4th, 2026 finally arrived, the day we got our exam results. It was a surprisingly short day. You showed up, received your results, and that's it. However, it wasn't graduation day yet, and we still had to receive our final diploma. So, what came next? The Abiball. Or if you're not from Germany, you can think of it as our version of prom. And honestly, this was probably my least favorite part of the entire 2-year journey. Unlike many school events, the Abitur isn't funded by the school. It's organized almost entirely by the graduating class, which means we have to pay for it. Depending on the venue and the food, the decorations and everything else, the total cost can easily reach somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 euros. Now, how do we earn enough money, you ask? Students organize cake sales, collect donations, sell drinks at school events, and volunteer at local festivals or town events in exchange for money that goes towards the prom budget. Sounds reasonable, or at least at first. Because here's where things started to annoy me. Seriously. Given that not everyone volunteered regularly, the prom committee introduced something they called work hours. Every student was expected to complete a certain number of those work hours over the course of the 2 years. So what if you did not complete your work hours? You simply had to pay money instead, by yourself. Now that already felt a little strange to me. But the real problem was what they considered a work hour. Because an hour is supposed to be 60 minutes. That's kind of the whole point of an hour. So naturally you assume that if you worked an event for 5 hours, you'd receive 5 work hours. Right? Right? No. Just kidding. Only one work hour. Apparently, it didn't matter whether the event lasted 1 hour, 5 hours, or practically the entire day. It's simple. One event, 1 work hour. To this day, I still have absolutely no idea how that system made any sense. I actually volunteered at one of those events once. It was an adults-only party, and they needed people to work in the cloakroom. A classmate and I signed up. From 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., we maybe only worked for maybe 30 minutes. After that, nothing. Absolutely nothing. For the next 4.5 hours, we just sat there, waiting. Occasionally, someone would maybe show up to collect their code, then the science resumes. Great moment to rethink your life choices, I guess, at least for me. I only got one workout out of it, the bare minimum. The organization of the whole system frustrated me. The first issue was that nobody actually told us how many work hours we were expected to complete. It took quite a while before we finally learned the actual requirement. 2 work hours per semester. We have 4 semesters, 2 times 4 is 8, so 8 work hours in total. Now remember that one single work hour usually meant attending one event, regardless of how long it lasted. Let's assume the average event lasted around 4 hours. That's roughly 32 hours of your free time. 32 hours that you could have spent doing, well, literally anything else. Maybe working an actual part-time job or learning a new skill. Perhaps saving up for that bicycle you've been dreaming of so you could finally go on that 100-kilometer cycling trip. Okay, I should stop. I'm just fantasizing too much. Secondly, work hours didn't even carry over between semesters. In other words, if you complete 1 extra work hour during the first semester, it did not count. You couldn't use it to reduce your workload in the next semester. Explaining this whole system to my mother was extremely difficult. Even my half-sister, who is 10 years older than I am, never had to deal with anything like this. Maybe it was a new idea. Or maybe it wasn't a new idea. I honestly never bothered asking. Now, did the system actually work? Maybe, but not particularly well. The girl who coordinated most of it, and coincidentally the only girl in my computer science advanced course, regularly posted reminders in our graduating class group chat. At one point she mentioned that only 40% of the graduating class was actually participating. By then I had already been writing a rather passionate message about everything I thought was wrong with the system. Initially, I did not intend to ever send it, but then another announcement appeared. If participation did not improve soon, letters would be sent home to parents, and I decided to voice my concerns. That's a euphemism for complaining, by the way. Looking back, the message was, let's say, quite dramatic. I definitely exaggerated certain parts. Well, I guess sometimes you need a couple of rhetorical weapons if you want people to actually pay attention to you. Did it work? Surprisingly, yes. A few days later, I had a discussion at school with 2 members of the prom committee. To their credit, they genuinely listened. They admitted that the system hadn't been explained clearly enough. They answered my questions and addressed most of my concerns without becoming all too defensive. Unfortunately, the system itself stayed almost exactly the same. The following year, the requirement was simply changed to 5 work hours in total. As for me, after my cloakroom experience, I completely stopped volunteering for those events. Maybe it's also because I did not want to tell my mother about this. Eventually, I got a phone call from the only girl in my computer science class. But why? Because I was still missing 4 work hours. My options were either pay 80 euros, because each missing work hour suddenly costs 20 euros, something we also weren't told until fairly later, or come back to school after graduation and help decorate for a prom. Initially I wanted to help, but then I imagined explaining to my mother why I had to suddenly return to school after school had already ended. So I gave in. I paid the 80 euros. And that wasn't even the end of it. On top of that, I also paid 50 euros 3 separate times over the course of the 2 years just to attempt the prom itself. In the end, going to prom did not just cost money, it also ended up costing a surprising amount of time and effort. Now, did I ever actually want to go to prom? Not really, to be completely honest. The biggest reason was surprisingly simple. For me, I just didn't feel like I had anything to celebrate. 12 years of school were finally over, and somehow, that realization did not make me feel all too excited. I did not feel relieved. It didn't make me feel like I'd accomplished something extraordinary. Another reason was that I was convinced that most of my friends weren't going either. Ironically, I ended up being completely wrong. In the end, almost all of them showed up. The only exception was one of my closest friends, who unfortunately never received permission to take the Abitur exams. Technically could have still come to prom. He just did not want to. I also had this image in my head of arriving at prom, standing around awkwardly on my own while everyone else was having fun, dancing, and spending the evening with their friends. That did not sound particularly appealing to me. Besides, I'm not really a night owl. Staying up late has never been my thing. So, why did I even go there in the end? Ironically, the people who convinced me were the same two members of the prom committee that I had discussion with about in regards to the work hour system. They told me to generally be sad if I didn't come. After all, we were all part of the same graduating class. It was supposed to be one final evening together. Those were their words. They actually managed to change my mind. Kudos to them. Then came June 24th, 2026. Graduation day. We received our Abitur certificates in the city's monastery. Parents, teachers, friends, the principal, the mayor, photographers. Yeah, pretty much everybody would expect at such an event. Eventually, it was my turn to walk onto the stage and receive my diploma. I didn't really smile. Looking back at the photos, I probably had the most indifferent expression of anyone there. Apparently, it stood out enough that someone quietly asked me if everything was okay. I simply nodded. Why am I telling you this? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe it's just another example of how rarely I show my emotions outwardly. Or maybe it perfectly reflected how I felt about graduating in general. I genuinely don't know. That day we also received our yearbook. Naturally, we had paid for that ourselves as well, since it had been created privately by our graduating class. Like many yearbooks, it included a few most likely to style rankings. I was nominated in 2 categories. Albert Einstein 2.0 in most likely to go to everyone after graduation. I finished 2nd place in both. They're probably not wrong. You can do whatever you want with that information. One thing that genuinely surprised me was what was written on the diploma. Besides all the grades, it also listed my certified level in the foreign languages I had studied at school. For English, I received B2, C1, and for French, B2. If you aren't familiar with those levels, they're based on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or CFR for short. It's the standard scale used across Europe to describe language proficiency, ranging from A1 for complete beginners all the way to C2, which is near native proficiency. Now, where did those levels even come from? How does the school know whether you're actually B2 or C1? As far as I can tell, they mostly base it on how many years you've studied the language in school rather than on an official standardized exam. Well, let's just hope that the employers don't treat those diploma entries as proof of your actual language capabilities. Because imagine having to suddenly answer a phone call from like Paris or Marseille. Still, if I had to take an official language exam today, I'd walk into the examination room feeling pretty confident, I think. Maybe one day I'll make an entire video about learning languages in school in general. There was only one event left, the Abbey Ball. Since the venue is rented, the graduating class has to prepare almost everything themselves. So, naturally, we had to come the day before to arrange the tables, set up the chairs, decorate the hall, and make sure everything was ready for the following evening. After that, we even rehearsed our grand entrance. June 26th, 2026. Prom day, and I have to admit, I was pleasantly surprised. The program our graduating class had put together was actually really enjoyable. We were introduced in pairs as we entered the hall. The hosts performed a few comedy sketches, our class representatives gave their final speeches, thanking both the teachers and everyone who had helped us over the years. It felt surprisingly heartfelt. There was just one small problem: the weather. Our prom happened to take place during one of the hottest periods Germany experienced that summer. Europe was going through a massive heat wave at that time, which meant spending several hours inside a large hall wearing a full suit without air conditioning. Let's just say it wasn't exactly comfortable. And as if that wasn't enough, we also had to take all our graduation photos outside. In direct sunlight. Still wearing those suits. To make matters even more better, our photo session ended up being delayed a couple of minutes or even more because the schedule had fallen behind, which meant even more standing around in the blazing sun. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually love hot weather, just not when I'm wearing a suit. Then came what's probably the most bizarre surprise of the entire evening. Before the guests had even arrived, our graduating class held an online vote to decide who would become prom king and prom queen. At that moment, my friends suddenly decided I should become prom king. I kept telling them, please don't. Please don't. I don't want this. I don't need the attention. Besides, what does being prom king even mean? Do I win €1 million? They kept insisting I vote for myself. Eventually, I gave in. A few minutes later, something else caught my attention. The voting website. Out of curiosity, I refreshed the page. Then again, and again. That's when I realized, oh no, the website had absolutely no protection against voting multiple times. No account, no login, no CAPTCHA, no cookie verification, no IP restriction, nothing. As far as I could tell, anyone with enough patience could simply keep refreshing the page and vote as many times as they wanted. Which made me think, surely someone else is abusing this system far more than all the others, right? A couple of students from the other graduating class even walked up to me beforehand. Our new prom king! They proudly exclaimed, and I remember thinking, what? There's no way that's actually happening. Eventually, it was time. The host announced that they were about to reveal the prom king and prom queen. I'll admit, I was actually a little bit nervous. Then they called my name. Well, I guess I was prom king now. So I made the rather long walk from the very back of the hall to the stage. My prize? A crown, a golden king of spades playing card, and a golden poker chip, which actually fit our Las Vegas theme surprisingly well. At one point, they even asked me who I thought would become prom queen. I simply replied, I honestly have no idea. I'd rather remain mysterious, a little discreet. Turns out I eventually discovered who had orchestrated this entire little plot. The prom queen herself, whether apply is the right word is debatable. To this day, I still have no idea why she wanted me to become prom king so badly. I just can't describe the feeling. Afterwards, I quietly returned to my seat. Meanwhile, my friends naturally wanted photos with their new crowned king. Anyways, after 11:30 p.m., I decided I had a good evening and head home. I just didn't feel I was missing out on anything else. Others may have stayed there until like 2 p.m. The following day, we all returned to the venue one last time to clean up the mess. Considering the heat, I honestly expected only a handful of people to show up. Instead, quite a lot of people came back. We cleaned everything up surprisingly quickly. Yeah, I guess that's it. That was my experience graduating in Germany, or at least the parts that have stayed with me the most. I'm sure every school is different. And I honestly have no idea how graduation works where you live. Maybe some of the things I talked about are completely normal to you. Others may sound absolutely bizarre. Either way, I really want to get all of this on my chest. But while writing the script for this video, I know something. When I first came up with the idea, I wanted to call it Why I Hated Graduating in Germany. Looking back now, I don't think the title would have been fair. Also, why am I talking like this happened a whole century ago? I have no idea. Anyway, because as much as I complained throughout this video, and yes, there was a lot to complain about, I realized there were also moments that I would generally remember fondly, like cycling through town with hundreds of people, unexpectedly enjoying prom. Those aren't bad memories, they're just unexpected ones. That doesn't erase the moments I'd rather forget. There are still no memories of school that I'd happily leave behind if I had the choice. But I suppose that's just part of growing up. Nothing is ever entirely good. Nothing is ever entirely bad. And maybe that's why when graduation was finally over, my first thought wasn't, I'm so happy, I'm finally free. It was simply, that's it? If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little about my life, and maybe you learned something about what graduating in Germany is actually like. As for what I am planning to do after finishing high school, I am starting university right away. In September, studying applied computer science. I swear I'm the sole academic student in my friend group. I have plenty more stories I'd like to tell you in the future. So, until next time. Bye bye.